Thank you for downloading this RealAgriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. And welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, a big shout out to everybody listening out there, of course, on the RealAg Radio podcast. Well, today it's Friday, which means we got a RealAg Issues Panel. We got Kelvin, Heppner, Lyndsey Smith standing by, ready to talk about the biggest issues of the week. Remember Trump bucks? Well, now we got Trudeau bucks. Yes, government making a big announcement in terms of some money that's going to flow out to Canadians to try to deal with some affordability issues, short-term in nature, no doubt, and adding to that deficit. We'll get the panel's reaction to it. We're also going to talk about John Deere. Their quarterly earnings report came out kind of really much in line with what we've been hearing from the Association of Equipment Manufacturers on farmers cutting back on spending on equipment. We're also going to talk about some new polling data. Yes, relative to the Conservatives expanding their lead, I believe, on the Liberals. Liberals and NDP tied now in second place, but the Conservatives hold a 22-point lead over the Liberals. Is there anything that can close that gap at this point? We'll talk about that with the panel with Lyndsey and Kelvin here today. We've also got time for the beef market update with Anne Wasko. She'll be here from the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Looking forward to chatting with Anne. Lots happening when it comes to beef. From a financial standpoint, we saw this in our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index for October. Livestock farmers feeling a lot better about their profitability right now than some of their cropping peers. That is for sure. We're going to get an idea of what's going on in the cash markets in Canada and the U.S., what's happening between that choice select spread, and a whole lot more with Anne Wasko. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms, or you can maybe call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Hey, I want to mention with advancements in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and precision agriculture, we are moving into a new era of innovation. Join agriculture industry leaders in Ottawa December 3rd through the 5th to explore the future of agriculture and how Canada can capitalize on its opportunity to be a global agricultural leader. Visit growcanadaconference.ca to register. Okay, that's growcanadaconference.ca. I know Lyndsey Smith is going to be in attendance at that conference. It is one of the best. I really, truly believe this, that we get to go to a lot of different events across Canada, the U.S., and sometimes overseas. And the icebreaker at Grow Canada is one of my favorites. It is when you really, the entire cropping industry is in one room having some great food, of course, some nice refreshments, and you're going to get a chance to visit and collaborate and talk about what's going on in the industry. I always enjoy the Grow Canada Conference. They do a great job of putting that one on. And if you've never been to it, I encourage you to check it out. It's good. And the politicians rumbling around. It's a great mingle indeed. Always a great agenda as well. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we've got Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, joining us right after this.
I'm Lyndsey Smith, joining me with Genesis Fertilizers, Terry Draboot. So thinking about where things are priced from, but also where things potentially travel from, how does Genesis Fertilizers' proposed model address the logistical challenges?
There is very little product that comes from NOLA that hits Canada, mainly Ontario and Manitoba. NOLA is New Orleans, Louisiana, as I suspect most would know that. But if it does, it comes from the river, Mississippi, up to, say, St. Louis, into a transfer terminal terminal into a rail car into a distribution house in Canada and then distributed to retails. So lots of touch points and lots of costs. Genesis Fertilizers plans on building one plant, and that one plant is for Western Canadian farmers. Not only would the investors be entitled to the fertilizer that we produce, they would also profit from the fertilizer plant.
For anyone who's interested, how Genesis Fertilizers plans to deliver this, where can they go?
The best place is our website, genesisfertilizers.com.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It's now time to talk about what's going on in the cattle markets, and we're joined by Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Anne, how are we doing today?
I'm great, Shaun.
Things are good. It's snow. What? Like
we just got. We're not like Lethbridge. We got our first skiff kind of last night, but snow coming tomorrow. So It looks good. I like that first snow. Everything's clean, and we're ready for it. Everything's good.
If you say so. Hey, let's talk about the next generation of the Brant U trough auger. It's here. They can move up to 9,000 bushels per hour, even in the harshest of conditions. Visit your local Brant dealer today, or you can go to brant.ca. Okay, Ann, let's get an update. What's going on from a cattle price perspective? Start south of the border.
Well, a little bit better markets in the U.S. this week. We came off a little bit of a down over the last couple. But in the South, Texas, Kansas this week, we gained $1 back, so 186. And then in that Nebraska and the northern region, we call it 186, 187. That's 1 to 2 higher than last week. And 290 was their delivered trade, which is steady with last week. So a little bit better. And if the question is, well, why? We were on a bit of a downtrend, and how did we get this bounce? Certainly both in the U.S. and Canada, but from a U.S. perspective, packers have been running smaller fed cattle kills here in the last few weeks. And so that's put some pretty good support under that cutout. And so actually that choice cutout gained $3 this week. So it had dropped over the last few weeks. So it closed last night at 306.80. But again, that support and getting that support for the cutout gave us that support for the cash market. So that's kind of what happened there. The select spread, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, it's widened again to $34. That's not an all-time or anything, but it's out there. And again, just another confirmation, Shaun, about the demand for choice cuts and choice product, especially middle meats, as we head into the holiday season. And for the Canadian listeners, remember that next week we're heading into a holiday week, if you will, in the U.S. With Thanksgiving on Thursday. And so again, some good support as we go into the shorter production week next week.
Yeah, and we're also, what I was thinking too, the Canadian government announced the GST break, and a part of that is restaurants. And so that could be good for beef demand at restaurants in Canada as we go through the holidays.
Yeah. And again, going back, I don't know how many listeners, and if they didn't, they should go back and listen to your interview with Lance Zimmerman on beef demand and some of the pointers that some of the research they've done, or he's got his hands on in terms of what's going on at retail versus food service. And every little bit counts, but we're certainly holding our own. And this choice select spread just continues to confirm that demand for those high quality middle meats is just solid as heck, both at retail and food service.
Yeah. Kate, prices in Canada.
In Canada, we saw the local market in Alberta last night or yesterday, 405 to 408 delivered dressed. That's going to be called on the bottom end steady, on the top end +3. So again, a little bit of support there. That means when Canfax comes out with their average this afternoon, it should be around in the mid 240s, 245, 246. So that's if somebody's wondering where the live market's at, that's kind of where we sit. Today is U.S. on feed report day. So this afternoon, we'll get the November 1 report. So the guesses that would have come out earlier this week kind of set us up for what the trade is expecting, if you will, and what the futures market kind of have priced in. So the guess for the report this afternoon, November 1 on feed, same as a year ago. October placements up 3 and marketing's up 5. So that's what's in the report. Now, here in Western Canada, Canfax does a report for us, and it comes out a week prior. So it was out last Friday. And just in a nutshell, we saw the same kind of trend. October placements were up in Western Canada. October marketings were up. But one difference is, and we've seen this all year long, our on-feed numbers are running below a year ago, whereas the U.S. is running even, we're running below. And again, just, I think, quantifying the whole tighter supply here in Western Canada as we go. The one kind of interesting point that I saw coming off of that report for Western Canada was we had a big increase in the number of yearling heifers, so grass heifers that got placed in October. And so it's a big number, but I think, again, it's just reminding us that this year the conditions were so much better. Grass conditions were so good. You could run those grass cattle until October. Whereas last year, they were long gone by now.
Yeah. Give us an update on the feeder market compared to this time last year.
Yeah, so we're winding down, of course, on the calf run. It's been a busy go, but, it's been tremendous in terms of record prices. But when the dust all settles, if you just take, what are we running at an average today, the same week last year, our 5 to 6 weight steer calves are up $330 per head. And yearling steers, and these are just averages, are up $350 per head. So that's the year-over-year increase. If you were just selling cash cattle, feeder cattle, or calves this week versus the same week last year. So that's the kind of fall we've had. It's been incredible, and just a great way to kind of finish off this run.
I bet you there's a number of feeders that are looking at some of the destruction in the value of the Canadian dollar, and they're seeing that adds to the bottom line as well. No, we don't really know as far as how low this could go. You think back to the middle or the beginning of COVID, I think we dipped off 68 cents, so I guess we could use that a bit of a potential, but decrease in the value is definitely going to help on those export numbers.
Yeah, lots of folks looking at that 70 cent mark. And we've got some really important interest rate decisions both in the U.S. and Canada, middle of December. So 11th and the 18th, I believe, are the two dates, respectively. And so depending on what those decisions are, certainly can play into what happens with our Canadian dollar vis-a-vis the U.S. And of course, as we roll into 2025, we're going to certainly be into a new administration, and what decisions are made there and economically could play into the dollar. But you're bang on. This weaker Canadian dollar has certainly supported Canadian cattle prices as we finish off the year.
Yeah, we got about a minute left. What are some other data points that you want to bring up?
Well, I did want to, just because we're getting into the bread market right now. So bred cows and bred heifers, it looks like super demand, super interest. So we'll see prices are certainly starting off higher than last year. And I think the reason being, finally, of course, we've all been waiting for, when is this bread market finally going to catch up with what's going on in the feeder market? And I would say to you, I think that's happening. Certainly buyers are seeing, they came through a great grass year. We've talked about that. They've got feed and now they've got the calf check in the bank, right? So all those things mean we're going to go back and buy. We might only need a few. We might need quite a few, depending on who you are and where you are. But I think there will be some great buying interest on this bread market as we finish the rest of the year too.
Overall, we just did our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index for October, and livestock producers definitely feeling better about some of their broadacre cropping peers. That is sure.
It's been a long time since you've seen that reversal, hasn't it?
Yes. No, absolutely. That's what I keep on. I remember being at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference in August. And it was, the sentiment is it's about time, right? And I hear that on the Farmer Rapid Fire from some of the farmers across the country that have nothing to do with livestock. They'll say, it's about time. I got a cousin or I got a neighbor that's into ranching, and this is much needed. So I think there's a bit of a relief of a feeling there across the sector. And thanks so much for joining us here this week. Have yourself a great snowy weekend, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Shaun. You too.
Hey, we'll be right back on RealAg Radio with the RealAg Issues Panel. Lyndsey Smith, there's like a cross of those two. Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner standing by. Meet new Husky Pre-Herbicide, Koch's Apex Predator. Fight back against the toughest broadleaf weeds with Western Canada's first Group 27 herbicide for pre-burn and pre-emergent applications in cereals. A potent addition to Roundup, Husky Pre delivers fast-acting and reliable early-season control of broadleaf weeds, including resistant species. If you're tired of all bark, no bite with your cereal pre-burn, ask your local retailer for Husky Pre herbicide today. Always read and follow label directions.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Let's get into the RealAg Issues Panel. Up first, Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are you?
I'm doing well. We haven't been on the show together for weeks.
It feels that way, and I think that's actually legitimately true.
Yeah, so I feel I was in withdrawal. I didn't have any.
Were you really? You weren't.
There were so many smart aleck comments I couldn't make because you weren't here. So it's nice to be back.
Yeah, there's a few smart aleck comments from the audience as well. Like, can you take more Fridays away? Like, that kind of stuff. The audience being mean to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway, you're allowed to be out and about. It is that season. We are into conference season. So you're on the road all the time.
And with it has brought winter. Gross. It is disgusting. It is white and it's cold and it is. I think this has been a very quick flip. Like, we went from fall is gorgeous, the weather is nice, to all of a sudden it is old man winter fast.
Well, here in the Ottawa Valley, it is Novembering, like you would not believe. So 5 degrees, just rain, cold, east wind, mud everywhere. It is mud season. So yeah, this is our precursor to winter, and she's here.
Well, I don't know anybody that loves winter more than Kelvin Heppner, and he's joining us from Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are you?
I'm doing well, and yes, I do enjoy a good winter season, and it arrived this week here in our part of the world, although I went for a drive yesterday for some meetings in Winnipeg, and Winnipeg doesn't even have snow. We had a visitor from Tennessee at our meeting, and he was kind of disappointed. We had snow about half an hour outside the city, but it certainly isn't blanketing everywhere yet. So, and the grass was green, just like you were talking about, Shaun. Grass is green still right underneath the snow, so it was a quick turn here. But it is the end of November already.
All those people that are always like, oh man, it's snowing. It's so beautiful. This is wonderful. You guys are so lucky. Those are people that are here for 48 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Want to experience the taste of it. And then,
ski down.
It's a little warmer.
Well, Paige Warner, that works for us, that's out by Kinistino, Saskatchewan, she commented this week that they probably had more snow this week than they had all of last winter.
Yeah.
So,
which for some areas very needed. So it's okay, but they are they might get to snowmobile this winter.
Yep. Maybe. Could be some snow sledding indeed. So maybe. Yeah. Awesome stuff. Hey, excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca. I had a really fun week this week. I was out in Abbotsford, which is, as you fly in, you see a lot of different geographical patterns in agriculture as you get to travel, not just in Canada, but across the U.S. and once in a while to Europe and overseas. But Abbotsford has its own distinct fly-in. You really get the sense, and we hear a lot about, in the valley, how, land is expensive and how tight it is. You really see that from the air. All these farms sort of packed in together between the mountains and the city of Abbotsford or Chilliwack. You really get the sense of that from the air. And just that rural versus, up against the urban or urbanish people. it really got a visual sense of it, Lyndsey. Farming in the valley would be interesting.
Well, yes, it would be very interesting. It also is an incredibly high moisture rainfall area as well.
And there is a lot right now. There's water everywhere.
There is. You were there during the bomb cyclone, apparently. We learn new weather statements all the time. Apparently wasn't that bad for you, anyway, in the Abbotsford area. But it is one of those areas that, incredibly fertile soil, high rainfall, and yes, you're literally in this, tiny little area with tons of people. It's super busy, incredibly high land values, obviously. It is a very interesting little ecosystem there to farm in.
Yeah, and as you heard on the show on yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday's show.
Yeah.
This has been a busy week.
It's been a week.
Land prices there have sort of stabilized or maybe dropped even a little bit. We were hearing, but still very expensive. Very expensive. I think they said $150,000 an acre. Now in the Okanagan Valley, I heard a number of 300 this week in vineyard country. So take that, Southwestern Ontario. You got a long ways to go there. Keep rolling it higher. But Kelvin, go ahead.
One other thing about farming in that Fraser Valley, that's where there's a lot of chickens and a lot of poultry raised in that area. And yesterday, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency reported the 50th active case in what is now, I believe, the third or fourth wave of avian influenza to go through in the last couple of years in that valley. And so that bomb cyclone has been a contributing factor in terms of spreading the virus through all those farms in that area.
Yep.
So
Kelvin, talk about the significance of that. Like, I think for a lot of people that aren't in the poultry industry, they hear the 50 and they're like, okay, give us some context of that.
It's a significant number of birds. There's now, BC is over I think they're approaching the 7 million birds mark in the last 2 years that have been either infected and died from the disease or had to be depopulated because of testing positive on the farm. There's at least, I believe there's 3, maybe 4 breeder flocks that are currently have tested positive. And so that has long-term implications in terms of production of future chicks. And so that means BC will be importing more chicks into from Washington in the U.S. To meet demand for chicken in the province, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's and they've been through this before, but that doesn't make it easier. You know the routine, I guess, in terms of disinfecting and getting back into production, but that doesn't make it easier.
Yeah, for sure. There's also interest because you're right up against the Canada-U.S. border, so trade was talked about a lot. A lot of concern from people in the supply management industry about what's going to happen going forward with the Trump administration. But there's also people that live on the Canadian side but farm in Washington. I heard stories about that as well. So really, really kind of a unique situation. I want to talk about Lawrence MacAulay, Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food in Canada. We talked the last couple of weeks about his trip to China, which his office was really slow to actually confirm. We had heard about it from stakeholders instead. Well, they've confirmed that he's gone, but Kelvin, also they really didn't at all meet with Chinese government officials. Who did he meet with?
So he met with several industry associations, importer, exporter, meat associations, Chamber of Commerce, those types of organizations. He also met with a bunch of Canadian stakeholders and companies, including a big event, the annual general meeting of the Canada-China Business Council, where he was a keynote speaker at their business forum banquet. But it appears that Minister MacAulay went to China and did not get a meeting. He received a cold shoulder from the Chinese government. And so that is significant because it's very rare, almost unprecedented that a Canadian government minister leaves the country on a trade mission without having a bilateral meeting with a counterpart or at least some officials and representatives, decision makers in the host country's government to meet with. And so that certainly raised questions when, like you said, the Canadian government, and we understand this was on directive from the Prime Minister's office, did not acknowledge his trip prior to, during, until he was back. That's when we got the news release saying that Minister MacAulay had completed a trip to China. And in it, it said that he met with several key industry associations and interlocutors was a word that the government, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada used. Yeah, it's even more vague than the usual stakeholders that governments use in their press releases and briefings. So, basically it just means somebody that participates in a discussion. So it doesn't mean that they met with government officials. And so yesterday, actually, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Agriculture testified at the House of Commons Ag Committee, and the Conservatives, after reading some of our coverage, put him on the spot and asked, did Minister MacAulay have any bilateral meetings arranged prior to this trip? And Tom Rosser said he believed he did not, and Tom was on the trip with Minister MacAulay. So confirmation that... So it raises big questions about what the Canadian government strategy is when it comes to China, whether Minister MacAulay should have taken this trip. Certainly in the past, there have been examples. We know with Minister Ritz, when he was the Ag Minister, that he refused to go to China unless he could get meetings with certain people. And so that type of thing often happens with these trade missions, and it's somewhat confusing why Minister MacAulay still went if he wasn't able to extract or have the leverage for a meeting. And of course, this is in the context of Canada implementing tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, batteries, steel, aluminum. And so the Canadian relations right now are in a tough spot. And so this is the Chinese government essentially giving the government of Canada a cold shoulder here.
Lyndsey, I'm going to be in Ottawa on Sunday night. Would you like to gather with me and some other interlocutors and have a discussion?
And stakeholders. Stakeholders, at least, like, I understand.
Well, I get that. I think everybody knows
get
what
that,
means.
right? Yeah. Exactly. And at least, but to me, why didn't you just end there? Because it actually makes it worse, I think, that you use this term. That nobody really knows. And it almost points a finger at, like, you didn't say government officials. So
it's like
I don't know why
speak is what it is.
Yeah.
Hey,
anyway.
They opened a meat. There's a news on a meat office, though. We should mention that, Lyndsey.
Oh, yes. Okay. Hang on. I'll get the details. But yes, no, this is good news, of course, for, our friends in the beef and pork, industries, of course, that we did see. There were members of, the Meat Council, and help me out here. I don't have it in front of me, that were there.
Canadian Pork Council and Canadian Meat Council.
Yes. Canadian Meat Council that were there.
That whole association is also part of it.
Yep. To set up an office there. So, I mean, this trip to China, I think, was incredibly important and was done, there was an announcement made of this meat office getting established. It does have government funding. So there was, I think it's just over $200,000 announced, from the government funding for this office. And I think from the industry side, it was very successful in that way. There's a lot of important ties being made here and commitments being made to China and the region. But certainly not, I'm pretty sure someone would have liked to talk about, canola while they were there and the incoming tariffs. And that probably did not happen. So
that was,
good news on the beef side.
I love my dad to death. Okay, like I really love my dad, but when I heard that MacAulay went over there and didn't meet with somebody or from the Chinese government, I thought of my dad, where my dad will just show up at our house and be like, "Hey, I stopped at your house, you weren't there."
Right.
This is kind of what this reminds me of a little bit. Like, why weren't you there? I showed up and I was on your front step and I was knocking, the dogs were barking, but you weren't there. Yeah, you phone ahead and tell me.
You could.
Yeah. So that's Lawrence MacAulay pulling a Dick Haney. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we've got more to discuss here on RealAg Radio. We'll be doing that right after this.
Joining me today, Mike Schaefer, Field Sales Manager with New Seed. Why should a grower in the upper Midwest be looking at adding the omega-3 canola production system to their lineup?
From a program perspective, we've got delivery windows, which growers ask for. They want to have more control on when they bring their bushels in. There's premiums associated with each window. There is a 10 bushel act of God on this contract. The act of God does not exist a whole lot anymore. We've got an early commit program where you pick up $1.50 with an ITG signed up by December 5th. We really appreciate our grower base, and returning growers will pick up another $1 a hundredweight. We've got a crop input incentive, anywhere from $15 to $20 per acre, depending on the amount of acres that you do it. And that is a check back to you during or shortly after the growing season.
Growers in the upper Midwest, where can they go for more information?
A quick Google search, omega-3 canola. There's a box there that you can get an interest form filled out, and then that gets fired off to us FSMs, get you in touch with the right people.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Hey, as you're planning for 2025, and we were talking about snow earlier in the show, but spring will be here before we know it, people. We got stuff to look forward to, including planting. Hey, take your oat game to the next level with CDC Endure from Alliance Seed, one of the top yielding varieties in the Prairie Provincial Yield Trials. Available from authorized Alliance Seed retailers. Visit allianceseed.com for more information. I know Kelvin loves oats for breakfast, and he thanks everybody out there for growing CDC Endure. Right, Kelvin?
Correct. Porridge for breakfast and chocolate chip cookies after lunch and supper.
Look at you. You just,
With oatmeal.
Nice.
Yes.
I remember one year I did the SAS Pulse regional meeting tour, and they proved you can incorporate lentils into pretty much every meal of the day and snack. And
you can.
It'd be cool to go like on an oat, because I think there's a lot of things you can do. You can do more with oats.
Oh, yeah. Oh, an oatmeal in your ground beef for hamburger.
Yeah.
Think of all the things you could do.
Getting hungry here. John Deere. We've been talking a lot about some of the cutbacks that farmers can be making, and one of the trends that we are definitely seeing, and the Association of Equipment Manufacturer numbers definitely show this. We're seeing a pullback in demand when it comes to farm machinery. Deere had their Q4 earnings, Kelvin, and wow, it showed itself there as well.
Yeah, these numbers came out yesterday, and net sales and revenues for Deere and Company as a whole down 28% for the fourth quarter. If you look specifically at the production and precision agriculture division of Deere, net sales for the quarter were down 38%. And so, yeah, that is a clear indicator, a signal of what's happening in the broader ag economy. We've heard similar numbers, maybe not quite this high, from the other major manufacturers over the last couple of weeks as well with their quarterly earnings reports. And so, yeah, it's and this aligns with what we're also seeing, like you said, from Association of Equipment Manufacturers in terms of reduced demand year over year right now.
Yeah, we look at some of our research we've been doing with Real Agri Studies, Lyndsey. What we've seen is farmers' concern, the fourth biggest concern they have for 25 is equipment prices. And when we asked about cost-saving mechanisms that they were, the levers that farmers were going to pull, cutting back on equipment spending was actually the number one thing that farmers are going to be doing. But to no one's surprise, I think.
Well, exactly. I mean, realistically, for one thing, it's a big ticket item, right? So you can make a lot of change if you simply stick it out maybe another year, a couple of years with the equipment that you have. So let's face it, there are certain things that are easy to manipulate, and other things that are very, very difficult. Also, realistically, something like a pound of nitrogen, we know what our return on investment is. You get that back that year. But machinery are longer term impacts as far as, what the money that you put out. And so it makes sense, certainly. And especially if you've got a handy team, bringing equipment through another season, maybe two more seasons, a lot more affordable than putting out, big dollars for new equipment. So not surprising necessarily. And definitely we're seeing it, industry wide from the AEN numbers, but we're also seeing it as these companies report quarterly earnings. We're seeing pullback on production as well. And as we talk about, it's sort of proxy for how farmers are feeling about their finances and making those decisions going forward. So not surprising, but definitely an indication of how tight margins are likely going to be for the foreseeable future.
Abacus Data is out with some new political polling this morning. And interestingly enough, no Trump bump for the Liberals. So if you thought the election of Donald Trump was going to provide a little bit of steam to the Liberal popularity, you're wrong. Because actually, I think over the last poll they did, the numbers moved from 19% to a 22% point lead for the Conservatives. And now we have the Liberals tied with the NDP in second place. Maybe to counteract that, Kelvin, maybe sort of if Trump getting elected wasn't going to raise some popularity for the Liberals, maybe giving a bunch of money out will. We got some checks going in the direction of some Canadians here as of this week.
Yeah, a big announcement yesterday from the Trudeau government trying to break into the news cycle and maybe also break the stalemate, the paralyzing of the House of Commons that's happened here over the last 2 months, announcing that they will introduce legislation to have a GST holiday, remove the GST from a bunch of different things, mainly food related, that where GST is applied. Of course, basic food products already don't have GST normally, but restaurants, beer, I see are on the list of things that won't have GST here going into the holidays. And then at the end of that 2-month holiday, if again, this is all pending this legislation actually getting passed, they're going to send out $250 checks to all working Canadians who make up to $150,000 a year. So the total bill for all of this is estimated at $6.3 billion. So to me, this is the most cynical of politics, and it's the cheapest, it's the dirtiest form of retail politics, paying $6.3 billion, adding it to the deficit that future Canadians are going to have to pay just to stay in government for a little bit longer. It's a pretty sad situation. And so, yeah, and it also potentially looks like it'll take, if this passes, it would take the government to that February date when a bunch of MPs' pensions kick in. And so we likely wouldn't have an election before that, because the NDP have said they will support this. Although the NDP are saying that they're not going to support ending the stalemate in the House of Commons yet. So yeah, it'll be an interesting few weeks here heading into the holidays if this legislation actually gets passed, and whether they are successful in trying to portray Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives as the Grinch here, preventing this GST, this very short-term GST break from passing.
Yeah, Lyndsey, I kind of follow Kelvin's thoughts there. This just, instead of actually working on fixing some of the financial matters, we've heard a lot from Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland about, the tough decisions, and, they, trying to sound a little bit more like a fiscal hawk, a bit of a reversal from some of the spending the Liberal Party has been doing. This is just fitting back into the stereotype at a time where I know there is some affordability issues. There's no question about that. I'm just not sure this is really addressing the problem.
For perhaps the first time in my life, I agree with the Bloc Québécois. So put it down on the calendar, everybody, because of course the Bloc leader, well, they said, so Justin Trudeau is willing to do this and rack up $6 billion just to hand out one-time checks to people, but isn't willing to make a change for our seniors which is the change that the Bloc wanted, right? So realistically, sort of throwing it back in his face and saying, you told me you didn't want to spend this money and that it was too much to go into debt over. But when it's literally, vote buying, it's okay. But if it's a change to keep, that makes the Bloc happy and gets more money for, now, I'm not saying either one are the right move. Those are flawed policies. Right? Yeah, exactly. But I mean, he's got a point. That realistically, this is just such blatant. Now, and I live in Ontario, so I am going to be rolling in it, guys, because once the calendar flips, Doug Ford is also sending me $200. Now, Doug Ford says it's because the province has done better than expected and has extra money, but it's my extra money. So I'm just getting my own money sent back to me. All of this to me, I am so frustrated. Our parliament is just a mess right now. We just need to have an election, please, because nothing productive is happening. This is just the Liberals scrambling for every week to stay in power, and just let Canada decide, please, and stop going into adding $6 billion to our deficit to send me a check.
Going back to what you were saying, Shaun, about Freeland and trying to appear as fiscally responsible, we already saw the parliamentary budget officer last week say that those fiscal guardrails are already in the rearview mirror. We've blown past those, or the government has blown past those with its spending this year, and then now we're adding another $6 billion to the deficit, to the spending, and so to me, This is another example of where government policy is just putting a huge burden on young Canadians. And another example here is this $250 check is only going to working Canadians. And so if you were, say, a student who couldn't get a job due to competition from workers that aren't permanent residents in Canada, you're not eligible for this payment. It's a slap in the face to young Canadians in many ways to me. I don't know. This government is doing many things right now that are opposite to what it says it stands for, and it seems to be increasingly doing these types of events or making these types of scenarios.
I got a question for both of you. When we have an election, and maybe even post-election, if you believe the polls, it looks like we're going to have a conservative government. Okay, do you believe that whether it's during the election or post-election, that we will have an honest conversation about the future of Canadian healthcare. And I know that's a heavy question to end a segment, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are, because I am hearing so many comments from people in our audience, whether that's via email, text message. I was at live events. I'm speaking to crowds. This is an issue that is of real concern, but it just seems like it is not cool to talk about it. Lyndsey, do you think we could actually have a mature discussion about this?
We have had how many provincial elections? Why are we not having that conversation there? Healthcare is provincially mandated. So while it matters at a federal level, don't get me wrong, it absolutely does, because we get transfer payments from our federal government. Why are we letting the premier slide on this? Because we shouldn't,
though, but because I think a part of it is we need the federal government to sort of lead we are going to have a national discussion.
I actually completely disagree. Our premiers are incredibly powerful in the dollars that they spend and where they decide to put them. Yes, money comes from the feds, and yes, the feds need to actually manage our federal system properly so there is money to go to the provinces, but we have let the premiers way off the hook for far too long.
All of them.
All of them. I am saying this across the board. Our provinces are incredibly powerful in the decisions that they get to make for their budgets. When it comes to healthcare, if you're not happy with your healthcare, it is your premier's fault, not Justin Trudeau's. I hate to break it to you. But our healthcare system is a mess, and it is our provinces that wear that 100%.
It's both, though, because Lyndsey, in some provinces, like provinces like Saskatchewan, some of the maritime provinces have tried offering some private services, and the federal government right away says, "Hang on, you can't do that, or we're not going to send you our transfer payment." And so the federal government holds them hostage to doing certain things too. So I think the blame falls on both levels, in my opinion.
There's a component. I'm not saying that the feds don't have anything to do with it, because that's where the money comes through, for sure. But Alberta has managed to find ways around that more so than other provinces.
Alberta is a government that doesn't rely on transfer payments. Here in Manitoba, almost half of our budget is on transfer payments, and so we're completely beholden to the federal government in terms of our healthcare policy in Manitoba.
What we need Alberta to do is just, maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need Alberta to say, like, set the example. Here's what we're doing. We're fixing it. And then everybody can run around and talk about how Alberta's going to have U.S.-style healthcare, even though we're not. We're going to have some sort of a hybrid system, and because we can't have a mature discussion about that either. Maybe that's what we need, is one of the provinces like Alberta that doesn't require the transfer payment to actually be the grown-up in the room and show how it can be done, because it is broken.
It is. And like, to that end, exactly that, an adult a grown-up conversation of, like, look, we have to set aside some of our, like, ingrained, myths, things that we believe that our healthcare is free, etc. We need to set that aside and say, we have people we need to take care of as a healthcare system. How do we actually do that with results? Not just feelings about universal healthcare or feelings about whatever. How do we actually do it? And you're right, Kelvin, the federal government has to fall in line. And that is where, as Canadians, we need to demand these things. But the premiers have got a total free ride on this.
My mother could barely, she was having issues with her heel, could barely walk. Okay? Told 2 to 3 years for the surgery.
Yeah. Unacceptable.
What are we doing?
Yeah.
And hey, I did have a friend who is a huge proponent of universal health care, say, well, you know what? Obviously it's not that needed. She just needs to wait her turn. This is the mental state that we are in. Hey, we got to take a break. We got more coming up here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, right after this.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Hey, welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. This segment is brought to you by Blackhawk EVO from New Farm. Blackhawk EVO is the next evolution in pre-seed burn-down herbicides powered by Duplasn. Blackhawk EVO delivers fast, flexible, and complete control of early germinating and winter annual broadleaf weeds. Find out more by going to newfarm.ca. Shaun Haney, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, all over Real Agriculture. Okay, now what started out as maybe a bit of a lark by Premier Ford. I got the impression he was being a little loose-lipped, sort of undisciplined in his commentary. He was the first one to mention that maybe Canada needs to negotiate a bilateral with the U.S. and forget about Mexico. Well, we've heard Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland mention this, and we even heard the Prime Minister this week talk about how, based on some of the decisions that Mexico has been making, this is something Canada has all options on the table. Are we now taking it seriously? Is Canada actually thinking about this as a strategy, or is this just tough talk because of the Trump election in early November? Lyndsey, what do you think?
Well, if we had to choose, guess which one we're choosing? The U.S. is our biggest trading partner and is incredibly, incredibly important. We already know that relationship is going to be tested. We know that the incoming Trump administration is at least threatening the tariffs, and maybe all they are threats, but it means we're probably going to have to acquiesce something to avoid said tariffs. And honestly, you're right. Ford kind of put this out there, maybe is, floating it as like a little trial balloon, but I think it sort of has got some people thinking, hey, wait a minute, this might be a way that we could soften the blow to Canada and especially to certain sectors by perhaps aligning ourselves more closely with the U.S. on a couple of these issues that, the U.S. really has gone head to head with Mexico about. And so, we trade with Mexico. I don't want to speak on behalf of Canada and say Mexico is, not important. It is. But at the same time, when you're putting it up against the U.S., it's not nearly as important. And we do know that, let's face it, Mexico, I think the numbers prove out that there have been things making their way through Mexico that maybe circumvent some of the hard work that Canada and the U.S. have maybe done on the tariff or diplomatic side, that maybe does go against what we'd like to do. And as we talked last week, finding consensus or agreement between two parties versus trying to get three, that can both work in your favor and against you. And in this case, I think Canada might be able to work out a sweet deal. Maybe.
Kelvin, what about the idea, though, that it's because in the 2016-18 version of a renegotiation of NAFTA, there was lots of talk about how Canada and Mexico could work together in negotiating with the U.S. You were stronger in a trilateral sort of arrangement than just a one-on-one bilateral. Was that overstated then, based on some of these comments being made by the Prime Minister?
I think that still holds true, but it's tough to assess the value of that and whether the benefit of that trilateral negotiating room, the room with three players instead of two, is a better situation than what Lyndsey's talking about, just a bilateral negotiation with the U.S., because Canada and the U.S. seem to be much closer aligned, and Canada wouldn't have trouble aligning closer with the U.S. on some of these things where the U.S. has much larger issues with Mexico. So to me, the cost benefit needs to be done on that, and I'm not sure that the benefit of the trilateral exceeds the potential cost of the trilateral. And so to me, this is I don't know if it's a strategic, if this is what the Canadian government should be aiming for, but I think it's certainly an option on the table and something that it is putting out there as this is a realistic scenario that Mexico, maybe we move ahead without Mexico. And you also have to remember the context, when CUSMA USMCA was negotiated, there was a point in those negotiations where Mexico kind of threw Canada under the bus, and they almost had a bilateral between Mexico and the US, and Canada had to come back in there and say, hang on, we want in on this too. And so I think there might be some lingering memories of that on the Canadian negotiating side too, where Mexico wasn't always completely loyal to Canada in terms of working together to try to gain leverage against the U.S., the bigger player in the tripartite agreement.
Yeah, and I think also there's a bit of a signal here that the trading relationship between the U.S. and Mexico right now is extremely contentious. Mm-hmm. And although Canada and the U.S. have issues to work out and deal with, softwood lumber, dairy, regulatory harmonization, digital taxes, things like that, none of it is close to issues like immigration between the U.S. and Mexico. I just think
that are flooding into Mexico this year. The number of Chinese electric vehicles landing on Mexico's shores is enormous.
What was that stat that I think Lyndsey had shared it initially in our group chat, which was in 2000 it was like 4% of vehicles in China in Mexico were from China, and now it's like 90%.
Oh, I don't know if it was that high, but it was like over a third, I think.
Okay. Significant though.
And the change, not only is the number significant, the change in how quickly that has happened is incredibly significant, which is telling. I think the other thing here is that when Canada is thinking strategically about dealing with the U.S., you're dealing with, a Trump administration, you're dealing with Trump. To me, sort of the enemy of my enemy is my friend is sort of where we go down, right? If the U.S. really sees Mexico as the problem, Canada is the ally, and we sort of hope that we get carried along as somebody, backing up the U.S., that maybe it works. Who knows? I feel like it's the only option we have, maybe.
Well, and a non-trade related issue, but, it's going to be a part of the discussion, because one thing we know about the President Trump negotiating tactics is you cross things that you used to think were mutually exclusive of each other, all of a sudden become connected. And Canada's defense spending and commitment to NATO will definitely be one of the fundamental things that Canada's going to have to live up to, indeed. And one of the most common questions that I've got from the audience is, and pro and negative. It shows you you're reminded a lot of times how our audience at Real Agriculture is on numerous sides of an issue. The most common question I had this week at AgX was, is the Trump administration going to take down supply management? And I heard it from dairy farmers, hoping not, of course. And I heard it from other farmers who were like, is this finally going to happen? So it was really fascinating. It's definitely on the minds of people. And it definitely has people thinking about what the future holds for that policy in Canada for sure. And speaking of all this trade stuff, we got a webinar coming up on Wednesday, which is going to be a lot of fun. Real Agriculture in partnership with CAPI. You hear Tyler McCann, the managing director, on this show quite frequently. Well, we're doing a webinar together on Wednesday. You can find out more by going to RealAgriculture.com. We're also posting it on our different social media channels. You got to be in attendance live. I don't think there's going to be a post recording of this one. You got to be there live. 11 a.m. on Wednesday. There's a link on our website. You can, and if you can't find it, just send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. We've got a great lineup of guests. Jim Wiesmeyer from Pro Farmer provide the U.S. perspective. We've got Carlo Dade from the Canada West Foundation. Megan Murdoch from H&K Strategies is going to be there, as well as Tyler McCann and myself. So it's going to be a good one. So you want to make sure you pre-sign up for that event. I'm also going to be, Lyndsey, with you in Ottawa on Monday. We're doing a fireside chat with Christy Clark on Tuesday at Agribition. So if you're at Agribition, be at the Grain Expo on Tuesday. Christy Clark and I, former BC Premier, we're going to talk about trade and geopolitical issues. Kelvin?
And potential future Liberal leadership candidate.
Yes.
Yep. That appearance is going to be brought to you by Helena Agri Enterprises and Resurge. So big thanks to them for sponsoring that event. Or for my participation in it. And then we got Canadian Outstanding Young Farmers. They're going to be all getting together from across the country in Lethbridge, my hometown, next week. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be the keynote speaker on Friday morning. So boy, it's a jam-packed week next week.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward.
I'm going to take the week off.
Thanksgiving for American friends in there somewhere too, right?
Yeah. Thursday.
I'm not taking advantage of the double dip this year.
You're missing the double dip.
I am. Yeah, I am.
That's a sad day for Shaun Haney. That's a sad day.
My wife's going to be south. I'm not. So I guess I'll be having turkey supper by myself in Lethbridge. Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. Everyone else as well. Take care.
Lyndsey, all the best. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Please check out realagriculture.com. Over the weekend, lots of great stories, things we didn't even touch on here today because we ran out of time. We'd love to have your thoughts and perspectives on all of it. Thanks so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. We'll chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.